Today I will be reading Chapter 2 of C.J. Cherryh's Cuckoo's Egg. They came from the capital. Copters landed and meds made the long trek uphill carrying their instruments and downhill going away. They were not pleased. Perhaps the country folk frightened them, gathering in their sullen watchfulness at the foot of the road where the aircraft landed. They came and went away again. Duan held the infant, talked to it as he watched them go, mindless talk, as one did with children. It, Haras, Thorn. "Duan," Thorn said, infant babble. "Duan, Duan." Thorn made busy chaos in the sand before the hearth. His cries were loud, ear-splitting. Shonunin were more reserved. He still soiled himself. When this would cease, Duan did not know. How to teach him otherwise, he did not know. Thorn's appetite had changed. His sleep was longer, to Duan's relief. "Duan, Duan, Duan." The infant sang on his back before the fire, and grinned, and laughed when Duan poked him in the belly, squealed when Duan used a claw tip, laughed again, enjoyed his belly rubbed, fat round belly which began to hollow now, the limbs to lengthen. "Duan." Duan leaned forward, nipped at Thorn's neck. Thorn grabbed his ears, and Duan sat back, escaping the infant grip, disheveled. He had let his crest grow. It sheeted raggedly down his back and strayed now in front of his ears. He went for the throat again, on hands and knees, and Thorn squealed and kicked. Clawed with small fat hands, with nails which were all the defense he had. Duan laughed aloud, well pleased. Thorn ran on tottering legs out of doors on the dusty earth where outbuildings had been, naked in the warmth of spring. Duan knelt. No one nowadays saw Duan's body. The lightning-blasted scars of his right arm, the scars that scanned across his side and leg. But here he wore no more than the small kilt in the warmth, with the hayi flowering by the back door and drifting blossoms down pink as Thorn's smooth skin. Infant hair had gone, come in gold, darkened again in winter metamorphosis. Perhaps it was seasonal, perhaps a phase of Thorn's life. Duan held out his arms to Thorn, and Thorn laughed as he plunged into Duan's arms, all dusty-smelling. "Again," Duan said, and set him upright, crouching again a little distance off to make Thorn run. Infant legs tried and failed, exhausted. Duan caught him and hugged him, licked his mouth and eyes, which Thorn did to him when Thorn had stopped laughing and gasping, clenching small five-fingered fists into Duan's trailing crest and the shorter hair of his forelock, and digging his face for a sly nip into the hollow of Duan's neck when he got the chance. But Duan ducked his head aside and got in a nip first. Small and clawed feet drove at his lap. The small body strained, and Thorn ducked down to bite him ungently in the chest. "Ah!" Duan cried, seizing him in both hands, kneeling, lifting him, kicking and squealing high aloft at arm's length. "Ah! Devious!" He hugged him again, and Thorn bit again. He had gained teeth and strength, but they were not teeth like Duan's. Duan bit at fingers, and Thorn caught Duan's mouth, and pushed back his lip to try his fingers on Duan's larger, sharper teeth. Duan nipped, and Thorn rescued his hand, and squealed. There were more visits. "Bye, bye, bye," Thorn bade the med sullenly from the porch. He squatted down naked as he was, and grimaced then. He had bit the chief med, and the med had come within a little of flicking an impudent youngster hard on the nose, but the med had stopped himself. Duan was standing there, Hatani cloaked in grey, arms folded. The meds went away. Thorn made a rude sound and urinated on the step. Duan went and snapped him loudly on the ear with a thumb and forefinger. Thorn wailed. "Bad," said Duan. The wail went on. Duan went into the house, into the sink, and got his hand wet in the sink. Thorn followed, naked, holding hands out, wailing all the way and dancing at his distress. "Shut up," Duan said, and flicked cold water in Thorn's face. Thorn blinked and howled and clawed frantically at Duan's legs. Not in rage. Pick me up, that meant. Duan picked him up, armful that he had become, rocked him with a swinging of his body in that way he had learned the infant liked. A small face nuzzled its way to his neck. This did not always mean biting. This time it did not. Thorn clung to him and snuffled, soiling his cloak with running eyes and nose. "You are bad," Duan said. To such simplicities the philosophy of Hatani bent nowadays. He swung from side to side, and the sobs stopped. The thumb went in Thorn's mouth, irrepressible, though Thorn ate meat now, which Duan chewed for him and spat into his mouth. Not advisable, the meds said, obsessed with disease, but he did it, which was an old way, a hill way, and easier than urging a spoon past Thorn's dodging mouth, or cleaning up when Thorn's fed himself and smeared it everywhere. Duan's mother and father had done this for him. He took perverse pleasure in performing this dutiful service. It shocked the Meds. That gave him perverse pleasure too. He smiled at the Meds. It was strange. They had become familiar with him. They looked him in the eyes, at least more than once in the visit. Elud Mingi sends regards, they said. I sent mine, he said in return. I send mine, he said in return, and perversely added, so does my son. That sent them on their way in haste, doubtless to take notes. He rocked Thorn and sang to him absently. Wena me, and Thorn grew quiet in his arms. You're getting too big to hold, Duan said, too big to make puddles on the step. That night when they sat before the fire, the spring nights were cold. Thorn crawled into his lap and sat there a while, and got up on his feet in the triangle between Duan's crossed legs, and touched Duan's face, the scarred side. Duan caught the hand of his maimed one and let it go. It's a scar, Duan said. He did not prevent the exploration. He made himself patient. He shut his eyes and let Thorn do what he liked, until Thorn pulled savagely on both his ears, which was challenge. Duan's eyes flashed open. Ah! Duan cried, drawing back his lips in a grimace. Thorn recoiled and stumbled on Duan's legs. Duan caught him in mid-fall and rolled with him, rolled holding him in his arms, never coming on him with his weight. Thorn screamed and gasped, and when Duan bit back and screamed and squealed till Duan clamped a hand over his mouth and held it there. Thorn grew still. The eyes stayed wide with shock. So. Fright, not fight. Duan gathered him to his breast and licked his eyes till Thorn had begun to pant, recovering his lost breath. For a moment Duan was worried. Small hands clutched at him. He gripped Thorn by both arms and held him up, grinned. Thorn refused to be appeased. That night Thorn waked howling at Duan's side, short, sharp yelps, gasped for breath. Thorn! Duan cried, and turned on lights and snatched him up, thinking he had rolled on the infant and hurt him in some way, but it was a nightmare. Thorn held to him. It was Duan Thorn feared. That was the nightmare. Ah, Duan cried, falling back, dragging Thorn atop him. Ah, you hurt me! You hurt me! To give him the upper hand. He had no pride in this. Duan, Thorn cried and snuggled close. Sometimes genes were truer than teaching. Alien. Thorn clucked at what had frightened him. Duan. Duan held him. It was all Thorn understood. There was a day in the morning bath that Thorn noticed his own naked skin. Thorn scrubbed at Duan's belly and at his own with a rough-textured sponge. Dropping the sponge and put both hands on his own belly, rubbed it thoughtfully. When he looked up, thoughts passed in his milk and storm eyes, with a little knitting of his brow. Slick, he said of himself. His speech did not go as fast as a shonen child, but there was a difference of mouths and tongues. Slick. Perhaps Thorn wanted to ask if his young mind had thought of it, when his own pelt would begin to grow. The hair on his head was abundant, tousled curls, which had finally settled on a faded, earthy brown. The eyes had never changed. It was a dangerous time. Duan took Thorn from the bath and held him in his left arm, hugged him close in front of the mirror. Thorn had seen mirrors. He had one for a toy. He had seen this one many times. Today there was distress in young Thorn's eyes, and thoughts were going on. Thorn had never seen a shonen child. He had never seen an other shonunen except the Meds. Perhaps some terrible thing was drawing on his mind, put together of little wordless pieces, images in mirrors, smooth bellies, a facility for making water in a long arc, which was for a time his nuisancefully cheapest talent. He spread his 5-fingered hand at Thorn in the mirror, in a way that should bring claws and did not. He grimaced at this, Thorn, as if to frighten him to flight. Go away, ugly Thorn. He flexed the fingers yet again, made faces. Duan turned them both away, bounced him to distract him. After that, Thorn did not mention the differences of their skins. Only from time to time there were small moments which Duan caught, a moment of rest when Thorn, lying beside Duan, reached and stroked his arm, turning the fur this way and that, Another when Thorn, finding Duan's hand conveniently palm up, dragged it closer to him across Duan's lap and played with it, fingering the dissimilar geometries of the palm, working doggedly at the fingers to make the claws come out. Duan cooperated. It was his right hand. It was not the deformity Thorn explored, but an ability which surely Thorn envied, and Duan was suddenly aware of a silence within the child, a secrecy which had grown all unawares, that small walled-off place which was an independent mind. Thorn had arrived at selfhood, a self which came out to explore the world, and retreated with scraps of things which had to be examined with care, compared, sign of a complex mind, against other truths. Thorn had arrived at self-defense, disappointed in his own body, it seemed, aware of his own deformity, and not truly aware of Duan's. Duan was Duan. Duan had always had scars. They were part of Duan, as the sun was part of the world. There was no past. Thorn had not been in it. Therefore Thorn could not imagine it. But Thorn's hands were not like Duan's. His skin was not. And Thorn had begun to take alarm, suspecting imbalance in the world. Duan gathered him close, as he had done when Thorn was smaller, rolled him into his lap and poked him in the belly, which Thorn resisted for a moment, and writhed, and finally gave way to, in squeals and laughter and of horrid attempts to retaliate in kind. Duan let him have that victory, sprawled backward on the sand before the fire, belly heaving under Thorn's slight weight, in laughter which was not reflexive like Thorn's. To be touched on throat or belly went against instinct. There was a sense of peril in that abandonment. But a child had to win sometimes, and lose sometimes. There was strength in both. "Follow, follow," he urged the child, looking downhill. The rocky incline was a great trail for small legs, and Duan's stride was long. Thorn stood with legs apart, arms hanging, and staggered a few more knock-kneed steps. "Keep climbing," Duan said. "You can." A few more steps. Thorn fell and cried, a weak, breathless sobbing. "I can't." "You have breath left to cry. You have breath to get up. Come on, up! Shall I be ashamed?" "I hurt my knee." Thorn sat up, clutching it and rocking. "I hurt my hand once. Get up and come on. Someone is chasing us." Thorn caught his breath and looked down trail, still hiccuping. "Perhaps it will eat us," Duan said. "Get up. Come on." Thorn let go his reddened knee. Limbs struggled. Thorn got to his feet, wobbled, and came on desperately. "I lied," said Duan. "But so did you. You could get up. Come on." Sobs and snuffles, wails of rage. Thorn kept walking. Duan walked with shorter strides, as if the way had gotten steeper for him as well. Again! Duan gave Thorn another small stone. Thorn threw. It hit a rock not so high up as the cliffs as before. Not so good. Again. "You do it!" Duan threw. It sailed up and struck near the top of the sheer face. The child's mouth stayed open in dismay. "That is what I can do," Duan said. "Match that." "I can't. My ears are bad." Something said can't. Thorn took the rock. Tears welled up in his eyes. He threw. The stone fell ignominiously awry, and lost itself among the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. "Ah, I have frightened you." Thorn is scared. I hear can't again. "I hate you." "Throw at me, then. I'm closer. Perhaps you can hit me." Duan gave Thorn another stone. Thorn's face was red, his eyes watered, and his lips trembled. He whirled and threw it at the cliff instead. "So, that was your highest yet," Duan said. So concludes Chapter 2.